What's up, Power Painters? Taylor Payton here of PowerPainters.org as well as TapeArt.com. And today I'm bringing you guys another video, another little talk, if you will. This one's not so much of a tutorial, even though I have some of my studies going on in the background. This one's more just kind of a general, I guess you could call it like a mini lecture about some things that I see a lot of artists doing that are not serving their highest optimization. It's not giving them the most advancement and progress that they could be getting. And it's just really simple stuff. These are really easy things to implement, but a lot of artists are not doing it. It's like you just get used to doing things a certain way, right? And so you kind of just keep following through in that capacity. And it's amazing for those of you who have already formed the drawing habit. And if you haven't formed the drawing habit by drawing every day, then I suggest you check out the video. It's about 2 videos back from this one that'll help you do that. But there are artists who are drawing every day who don't really have a plan in place. They don't really have any real direction, and that works really well for a small percentage of people who somehow gravitate toward the right things to study or have a really sort of fortunate capacity to absorb and keep on track, and it's like they just kind of progress well that way. But for a lot of us, it's better to have at least a simple plan, a simple breakdown of how we can actually endow ourselves with more creative power and just get a lot more done in terms of progress, in terms of feeling good about our stuff, in terms of making each and every time you sit down to draw count a little bit more. And I just want to talk about some of that stuff today. So basically, the subject I'm going to be discussing is deliberate practice. And it's the simplest thing in the world if you understand it. And that's why I wanted to, kind of take care of all of you artists watching this channel, because it took me a little bit to grasp this. I started drawing a little more seriously when I got into animation at around 14. And I was on certain forums, and people would always tell me, like, my drawings were falling apart, there are so many mistakes, it's really bad. And I didn't know how to take criticism then, so it kind of turned me away from those forums, and I didn't really figure out how to deliberately practice, even though people were telling me how to do that. So I'm not going to get into the whole, like, how to take criticism thing. That's another video. But for this particular video, I want to talk about the deliberate practice and how you can apply that to immediately start seeing more progress in your art. So let's see. I think the first thing I want to talk about with deliberate practice, as you kind of watch these, things going on in the background, is that you have to focus on learning a lot about a little. So a lot of us artists, we jump around way too much. We're like drawing figures and vehicles and creatures and just like everything under the sun. And that's not how you're going to see those initial results that are going to give you the confidence to continue. If you're studying fundamental principles, I would even recommend you only pick 2 or 3 of those. So let's say composition, values, and, line. It's if you pick 3 of them and do exercises that are focusing on those things, then you bring up those fundamental structures, and that helps all the other art. So there's a little more wiggle room when it comes to fundamentals and deliberate practice, but there's not as much as you would really think. So learn a lot about a little by picking, 2 or 3 things to really focus on as far as fundamentals go. Now, if you go to powerpainters.org, and I'll link in the description box, there is a blog post I wrote maybe a year ago that has a lot of good fundamentals listed, and you guys can just read off those fundamentals and pick 2 or 3 and have the follow through on how to get those. Now, for those of you guys who don't have as much of that self-starting aspect, who aren't really going to go out and Google it or find and buy books that have the fundamentals in them to practice them, I highly recommend going to the Power Painters Gumroad store and checking out the beginner drawing course, because that includes a lot of fundamentals as well for deliberate practice. And there are assignments at the end of every one of those videos, and it's an 8-week course that will give you the deliberate practice and the aspect that you're going for. Anyway, so that's one way to get better, is to learn a lot about a little and to practice deliberately. So for example, throughout this whole video, you're going to see in the video me practicing perspective and like exteriors. It's just really simple shapes. And this is stuff that I hadn't really taught myself or wasn't taught to me when I went to art school. And so as I'm moving forward with some of my personal projects, I'm realizing how much I need to practice these things. And it's going to take me weeks, but I'm going to get better each and every time. But you see, when you're practicing and you're practicing deliberately, you're looking for ways to do it better. You're trying to find new and interesting ways to build upon what you have built before. So let's say I'm going in and I'm laying in one point perspective. Once I realize the relationship that the shapes have to each other and how everything kind of projects from the vanishing point, then I'm able to start to build upon that, because the deliberate practice will give you these elements up in the air that are kind of getting transferred into your toolbox, your artistic toolbox. And as these elements start to fit together, you realize how things relate on the picture plane. And just studying a fundamental like perspective, or studying something as good in terms of subject matter as exteriors, these are really potent ways to level up everything in your art. And that's why I'm doing these exercises. That's why I'm sharing this kind of stuff with you guys. And even though sometimes the perspective isn't perfect, or you see me fail a little bit in the study and start over, I want to show you guys that stuff too, because I feel like it's really important for deliberate practice to have a couple times where it doesn't go through and you have to kind of stop and evaluate. The whole point of deliberate practice and learning a lot about a little is essentially to just keep on reiterating and improving and inculcating and ingraining, so that you're doing this thing over and over and over, and it's becoming a part of your nervous system. It's becoming a part of the brain cells that you build around it, and the connections that are being wired in your brain to do this specific thing. And there are certain tools, like I said, the fundamentals, that will give you the broadest amount of creative expression. We all try to go way too far too early and do things that we're not yet capable of doing because they're not in our nervous system. We haven't wired these things into our brain, and so when we draw the creature and it comes out wrong or gross, it's because we don't study anatomy. We haven't looked up, tons of reference photos and understood the shape language that makes up that particular creature design we're trying to do. So that's why when you practice deliberately these broader based things, you get this potency that you're able to transfer into a lot of different areas that you'd want to explore artistically. And I know that's the fun part, right? The fun part is to explore things artistically, but you can also find a ton of fun in deliberate practice. And like I said, I'm going to keep on emphasizing this throughout the video, because so many artists will be saved, including you, if you follow this advice. So just keep on practicing things deliberately. Keep on taking one or two subjects and learning a lot about them. Like, I mean, everything. Just obsess. Go and do like pages and pages of gesture drawings until you understand all the shapes and the weight of the human figure. And then you can tune it up with anatomy after that. Once you're really good at gestures, you can move on. But don't move on until you start to feel that proficiency kind of flow into your work. Right? So I'm going to keep doing these perspective studies until I get a really good feeling, like it's been ingrained. Like I'm like, okay, now I see my 2-point, perspective, my 3-point perspective, my 1-point perspective, and I can build cities. I can build rooms. I can build the geometry, and I know that it will relate to one another in the proper format because I've studied this so much, and it has an accuracy about it, and now I can take that and transfer it to everything else I do, right? So the subject matter I'm sticking with is basically backgrounds, and mostly geometric backgrounds, and the fundamental I'm sticking with is perspective. And so as I develop these exercises for myself, I become autodidactic, which is just a fancy way of saying that you know how to teach yourself. You've learned how to learn, in other words. And that's another thing that artists never, I don't want to say never, a lot of things that I see artists not picking up on very early, or just some of them almost never, is they don't teach themselves how to learn. And that's really important, because if you don't teach yourself how to learn, which is kind of a strange concept anyway, then you're going to be frittering away energy when you're even if you are practicing deliberately, which will help you phenomenally, if you're not practicing deliberately in the way that you learn best, then it may not be as optimized as it could be. And as a power painter, as somebody who wants to get better, who wants to have more fun, more creative expression, and be able to do and create the work that they want to create, I want you to be able to understand, how you learn and how the deliberate practice is going to be optimized by that process. So, how do you figure out how you're going to learn? Even while you're doing deliberate practice, you can figure this out. So let's say, once again, just because it's in the video, I'm going to talk about the perspective again. And perspective is a crucial tool anyway for drawing. So as I'm working out these perspective-based problems, I'm figuring out what's working for me and what is not. And I'm thinking and I'm getting critical about this stuff. Not overly critical where I'm, deflating myself or, harming myself emotionally. I'm just thinking like, okay, that didn't work when I put these lines together. And if I duplicate them like this, or if I use the line tool, and I'm starting to figure out how I'm learning this way. So if I learn best in a very linear, logical way, like perspective is a very left-brained exercise, then I want to do a lot of it because I'm going to thrive. Now, there are some of you who are more, right-brained, meaning that it's going to be more free-form, less geometric, more abstract. I did a lot of figures for a long time, and I really, really love to do figures because even though there's a great deal of construction about them, it really helps you kind of understand the way forms work and the way that they kind of flow into one another. And if you kind of have more of a linear, logical, mathematical approach, then you'd typically be more logical or left brain. And if you have sort of a freer, like I just want to eyeball it and get the feeling down approach, then you have the more right brain kind of thing going on. Now, I'm not saying that these are perfectly scientific terms or anything. These are just ways that I've read about, ways that I've used to parse some of these aspects of learning, right? So if you are a very methodical person and you're very logical and linear, you can lack emotion. And if you're very not methodical, if you're very free and abstract and flowing, you can lack structure. So that's why I always recommend, whether you learn best with a lot of structure, whether you learn best with a lot of freedom, that you start to implement bits and pieces of each to fill the gap. Because when you can get that duality to kind of separate and you become that one aspect of learning, then you can take and really explore and have a lot more power because you're not getting too weak in your leanings. You're not letting your right brain atrophy because you're using too much of your left, and you're not letting your left brain atrophy by using too much of your right. And once again, these are just analogies. These aren't perfectly neurological parallels I'm drawing here. These are just things that I use to convey information. So whether you find that you learn best in a linear modality or learn more in a free modality, try to implement just enough of the other one to help the way you learn best grow, right? So if you notice your stuff falls apart a lot, then you need more structure. If you notice that your stuff is really stiff, then you need more freedom and flow. So that's one way of sort of trying to understand how you learn is, am I a freer learner? Am I a more logical learner? Am I more mathematic and geometric in my learning? Or am I more abstract and emotional in my learning? And once again, apply this all back to deliberate practice because that is the bottom line. Even if you don't optimize the way you learn or you only have a cursory understanding of how you learn, the deliberate practice is going to give you so much more energy in your stuff. It's ridiculous. Learn a lot about a little, practice those things deliberately, do them not just rotely, but think about it the whole time. Keep improving and building upon what you've done prior, because that's what's really going to give you the most improvement in the shortest amount of time. And that's what we all want, right? We don't want to spin our wheels forever, make a bunch of mistakes that ultimately end up not serving us in the best way. We want to make the mistake and then correct it and move on to making better mistakes, right? Because making the same mistakes is the definition of insanity, or so we're told in kind of the cliche way. But The deliberate practice, like I said, is going to change the game for all of us. So do deliberate practice, figure out how you learn, and learn a lot about a little to recap. Like I said, I'm going to keep recapping because we tend to forget information if it's not reinforced a couple times. And it's best to keep on, like I said, inculcating it. So let's see, I have a couple notes here. I'm just going to take a look for a second. One thing I really want to convey to you as an artist is I want you to be really, really confident in your stuff. So even if you don't have a great deal of skill right now, or you're just getting started, or you have gone on some of these pathways where for years it seems you've only gotten marginally better and you feel like you suck, I want you to turn that around, because nothing will sabotage you like having those affirmations or those deep-seated beliefs that your art is bad and by proxy you're bad and there's something fundamentally wrong with you as a person. Because I spent way too much time doing this as an artist, and you don't understand how to work with yourself emotionally as you go through your craft, because there are going to be instances where you're just so down on your stuff, and it's weird how it happens to artists like way too much. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to talk too much about things like, the overly depressed aspects of it, because that's not what this video is about. But I noticed that a lot of artists have really, really low self-esteem. They have a really bad mental image of themselves, and I think that that is another huge reason why some of those artists spin their wheels for way too long. And it's like you just have this tendency to act out who you feel you are. There's this consistency bias within us as human beings that I've noticed, at least. Like I said, all this stuff is just things that I've noticed. I'm not saying it's true. I'm not saying it's perfectly right. These are just parallels that have really helped me once I've been able to extrapolate and understand them. So once again, if you want to argue about it in the comment section, that's fine. I'm just trying to give you guys some valuable information that to me has proven life changing. So I'm not trying to like say or decree anything in stone or concrete or gold or metal or whatever. I'm really just trying to get these principles that I've read about from other people who have been, successful to the highest echelons of human potential, as far as, developing yourself, developing your art, and understanding yourself as a being, and, moving through all of this and navigating this kind of stuff. So, to go back to our earlier point, it's really about changing those deep-seated, awful beliefs about I suck, I'm a bad artist, I make the same mistakes over again, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. I have a blog post, once again, on the powerpainters.org website that is entitled, You're Going to Make It. And it's pretty simple. It talks about the kind of things that I'm mentioning now. It's like we take so much time to get overly critical and beat ourselves, or we let something that somebody says just tear us down or make us feel really bad about our art. And that emotional intelligence, that ability to evaluate how you're feeling while you're working or how you feel about your art, is also another great tool for learning. Because if you're having a ton of bad feelings, like obviously negative, like your chest is getting tight, your throat is getting tight, your eyes get heavy and tired, or you feel like a drain of energy while you're working or while you think about working, or when you're done with a piece, these are things that you need to examine. These are things that you need to overcome. Now, in the future, if there's enough demand for it, if I can spend the time, I might create a course on techniques you can leverage to sort of build yourself up in terms of energy and break some of these patterns and paradigms that we all have. Because, let's face it, how many people do you know, especially artists or creative people, that don't have some form of what I'm talking about? Some form of emotional, like, rigmarole that just doesn't need to be there in its entirety. Like, fractions of it are good when you can take those little bits and understand, like, okay, this is a negative portion, and I'm not going to get overly emotional about it. I'm not going to let it break me or, harm my development as a whole, but I can look at this negative element in my art and I can fix it. That's when it's good, when you can look at the negative but accentuate the positive. Because ultimately, you are capable of fixing whatever is wrong with your stuff. it's just how it is. The same mistakes we all make are fixed by pretty much the same solutions. This is universal as far as art goes. The fundamentals will allow you to solve most of the technical issues. So that's why you want to keep on learning and deliberately practicing fundamentals until you start to feel proficiency in them. And as you move out of those fundamental areas, you'll realize that a lot of it is the emotional or the inner mental game that goes on around the time that you're creating art, or just your feelings around it in general. So even with deliberate practice, even with learning how you learn, even with learning a lot about a little, there's going to be those emotional elements, just ways that we tear ourselves down, get overly critical, let others beat us or affect us as far as our craft goes. And that's something to overcome as well. And like I said, a lot of artists don't talk about it, but I want to bring it up so that you feel less alone, because I felt alone in it for a while. And I realized the more I got out there and talked to other artists and networked and went to sketch jams at coffee shops and went to events, that we all go through it. Excuse me. We all go through the same stuff, and our problems are not unique. And that's okay, because that means that others have solved them, others have risen out of it, and now they're creating art on new levels. And that's what I want for you more than anything else, is to rise out of where you're currently at, to work your way out of it, and to create art on levels that you've only previously dreamed of. Because that really is what it's about, is that progress, that feeling of advancement, that greater degree of expression and breadth and depth to your work. And it's really, like I said, tempting to fall into those emotional places when you're not creating the work you want to create, or when you see somebody who is creating the work they want to create, and or at least you would perceive it that way, and you're like, oh, I'll never be as good as that person, or I'll never reach that level, or blah blah blah, because that's just another trap in and of itself. Emotionally, mentally, it's going to sabotage all your efforts to learn. It's going to be that underlying hum to your beautiful melody that's just destroying the composition. So work on that as well. Find those areas, those elements, those thoughts, those emotions that bubble up within you as you're working on your art, as you're looking at your art, as you look at someone else's art. Be cognizant of that emotional element as it arises, especially the negative ones, and sort of factor and deal with that and move those things around and shape and change those beliefs until they become more serving of your highest, creative good. It's really, peculiar to talk about some of these things regarding art, especially because so much of what we do seems to be about the art. But the more that you get into, drawing, painting, animation, graphic design, music, whatever it is, the more you get into it, the more you realize how you are inextricable from that process. The person you think you are, how you realize you need to learn more about learning, or your motifs that keep showing up in your work that you want to refine. So I really think it's important to talk about these kind of things, because it gives you a better idea of yourself as well as your art. One of the biggest reasons why I create is to find out more about who I am as like a being, as a person. And like I said, not going to get too far out there with any of this stuff, but I feel like a lot of you feel the same. So, yeah, just don't feel stupid about your stuff. Don't feel dumb. Don't feel incapable. Just work out of all that gradually, because no matter where you are, no matter where you've been, no matter the kind of art you want to create, you can get there. And you're the only one who's going to take you there. So I really invite you to learn about learning, to really stick with a couple subjects until you feel proficient in those. Because if you once again spread yourself too thin and you're kind of like all right or mediocre or even bad across the board because you've been, spreading yourself so thin, then that's not going to help the emotional element any. All this stuff feeds into one another. So take that time to get proficient at one or two things, and then you can really feel that. You can get the feeling of what it's like, the experience of, wow, I'm good at this. My faces are solid. People can connect with my figures, or my landscapes are beautiful. People want to walk in them. There's nothing quite like having that proficiency, because then once you have it, you can translate that feeling into other fields. For example, if you are really good at landscapes and people can feel like they want to walk around in them, explore them, or it gives them a really strong experience when they look at it, then you can say, okay, well, how do I do that with figures? Because I'm really interested in adding figures to my landscapes. And so you would spend some time doing figures. And in the beginning, as you're learning to do them, you're like, wow, these are really far away from my landscapes. But that's okay because my landscapes were here at one point too. So you can apply this model or this mode to different subject matter because it will allow you to bring everything else up to the degree that you have brought something else up. So that's why it's important to gain proficiency and to learn a lot about a little. Yeah, I feel like let me just check my notes here, see if there's anything I missed, and we'll wrap up the video because it's a lovely Friday, at least when I made this video. So I want you guys to have more time to actually apply some of this stuff and not just listen to me kind of beat the horse to death about it. So don't fear failure. Don't fear wasting your time. Don't fear wasting, your emotional energy. Just let go of a lot of the fear is the last thing I want to talk about. So art and fear, there's an actual book on this. I haven't read it, but I heard it's very good. Art and fear are not really good to combine. At least not in my experience. Like I said, all this stuff, you can make an argument against it. I do that all the time as I'm speaking. I'm like, okay, if you say that like it's, the end all be all, there's something to fight about. But I mean, I don't want to cause any conflict. But in my opinion, art and fear don't have a lot to do with one another in terms of getting the best result possible. So if you're approaching your stuff really fearfully, once again, that's another emotional element. If you're approaching your stuff with a lot of fear, then I feel like it's really in your best interest to start, divulging what you're actually scared of. Are you afraid people will make fun of it? Are you afraid that it won't be well received? Are you afraid people will point out a technical flaw? Are you afraid you won't be able to solve the mistakes that come? Really start to shine the spotlight of awareness on fear. And that doesn't mean to give into the fear. That doesn't mean to like take big bites of fear so you can have indigestion. Uh, that's such a weird analogy. It doesn't mean to take the fear and, you know, let it destroy you. It's just another element of what it is that we do. The fear is there to allow you to cultivate its opposite, which is courage, which is love. If you have enough love, enough courage to move around the fear, to take this element that is stopping you and to kind of burst through it with this radiance of courage or love for the craft, love art enough, have enough courage to destroy some of the fear that's coming up. So for example, if you're working on a character design and you start getting the feeling of fear like, last time I did this pose it didn't turn out so good, or my design was too busy and I wasn't able to parse the mistakes that I had, and that fear starts to arise, I would invite you to stop drawing, stop working on it, and just kind of take a step back. Like, you're might be at your computer, you might be at your drawing board, whatever. Just like literally take a couple steps back and sort of evaluate the emotion and start to like question it. Like, is that really true? Are these problems unsolvable? Is there something fundamentally so wrong with me that I can't, just destroy what I previously considered unbreakable? And the answer to all of it is you can. You can surmount anything. The fear is just there as an illusion, especially when it comes to art. You're not going to die if you make a mistake. You're not going to die if someone gives you criticism. You're not going to and that's like the worst thing everybody's afraid of is like to die. So, I mean, don't let the fear control you. Don't let the emotional element of all of this get in the way. The most potent thing you can do is to just focus in on some specific areas, know that you can overcome all of these things, and really just cultivate that discipline and do it over and over and over until it becomes a part of who you are, until it becomes a part of your being. And nothing under the sun could tell you that you can't do it. Because I'm telling you, you can. And I don't care who in your life tells you that you cannot, because it's up to you ultimately. Don't give your power away. You're the one who has to take these elements and make them your own, who has to draw these epic figures, who has to paint these beautiful landscapes, who has to, make radiant still lifes, and who has to study and discipline themselves to go over things until you start to, understand them to the greatest degree that you can. And once again, get the most creative expression, find out more about what you like, develop your artistic motifs. Yeah, I think that's a good place to stop. Thank you, Power Painters. I appreciate every single one of you. We recently passed 5,000 subscribers on this channel, which is just insane to me, honestly. The fact that people are watching these tutorials really spurs me to try and divulge and research and study and practice the most that I can, because I want to share all of this. I have a genuine love inside that I have to express for helping others overcome these difficulties, because we all face them and people don't talk about them. And me and my friends, me and my art friends, we talk about them all the time. And I feel like a lot of the community just doesn't address these things, and nobody figures out how to practice deliberately sometimes, and their art suffers for it, or they plateau for too long, and eventually you plateau for too long, you start going backwards. So, like I said, a lot of this stuff in the video that I've discussed will help you transform your art and even yourself tremendously. So I hope you got a lot of value out of this. If you'd like to support Power Painters, I highly recommend going to the description box and checking out the Power Painters store, the beginner drawing course, the beginner painting course, or the art evolution course, which is both of them combined, all come with the Bushido pack, which is 30 of custom brushes that you can't get anywhere else. They're just on Power Painters, and it helps me keep this channel open, helps me keep the videos flowing, helps me not have to take on as much freelance, because that, for some reason, freelance severely saps energy out of like every other project. It's so weird. But yeah, thanks for watching. Remember to practice deliberately, learn a lot about a little. Go to powerpainters.org, sign up for the mailing list because you want to be an awesome power painter, and read the blog posts there because it's more inspirational stuff, more good stuff. And check out the store to support Power Painters. Thank you very much, and happy painting.